Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. How is everybody? Check to see audio is working well. Can you hear me, world? Think it should be working now. Let's see. Yeah. All right. What's up? How you guys doing? What is up, Twitch? What is up, YouTube? What is up, Facebook? How's everybody doing? Seabass, MJ, Tuxcion. I'm absolutely terrible at screen names. So if I slaughter it, it's part of the fun. uh yeah. Today we are following up with our new project, the one that we've been working on for um, last stream we started with the awesome Bjorn Hurri was with us last week or last time. If you didn't get a chance to finish to watch that first one, you can go back on the Pixologic YouTube and watch that first one. Bjorn came and hung out with us for a little bit and talked about his ideas behind the character. So this is what we've been working on here. I'll just show you right here. So this is the character that we're starting to block out. Um, so yeah, he gave us a little breakdown of what his ideas were and what his inspirations were for creating the character, and we did a block out. Obviously, the blockouts don't look good as this to start, so this is the target. We're going to be doing it in the fashion of how I would sculpt a high res for video game pipeline. So it'll be not in this pose, but it will be in a pose, and as much symmetry as we can get away with, and we'll go from there. So this is where we ended up last stream with the blockout. So we went over just kind of getting the shapes in, starting from a base body, blocking out some shapes. We used a little bit of one of my favorite tools in ZBrush, which is see-through. We're able to kind of start getting an idea for. See, this one looks a little too big. I'm gonna scale this guy down a little bit. I didn't realize the So we're lining up the head with where the feet are, and it's definitely a little too big. Not much, but a little bit. Maybe we'll pull it back in a little bit. So yeah, that's where we're at. We started blocking out just some panels and stuff, and I think we're going to focus on getting the headpiece at least to a decent state this week or this session, and then we'll start blocking out more of the panels and stuff. But what I really want to do is focus on getting some good shapes and some nice consistency and stuff with the big bold things. So we're gonna try to get some of that out of the way today. Um, yeah. So I started with this one with just a kind of a flat plane and then sculpted it into place. So a lot of this stuff back here is just super gross. So some of the problems that you may get into when you're sculpting on something like this is, having the back face get into kind of some trouble. And dealing with the thickness of that can be a bit of a pain. But I use this backface mask quite a bit. This is in Brush Auto Masking Backface Mask, and it is brush specific. So right now I'm in my clay buildup, and you just come down to Auto Masking, and it's right here, Backface Mask. And I just pull that out onto my workspace. So let's put this guy on. Let's make sure I'm in Symmetry mode, cool. And then let's just start kind of cleaning up some of these shapes and see what we can do about getting this to a bit better of a shape and feel. So you see now that the backface mask on is it's only affecting one side. So really, I just want to kind of build up some shapes and kind of flatten this all out and get it to a good thickness, and then I'll start kind of building in some of these type of shapes, right? So we got maybe some thickness in here, some down in here, and then we'll kind of start working with this feel and getting some nice secondary shapes in there. So first round is kind of just about cleanup. And I don't really care that things are kind of poopy looking at the moment because I'm just going to redynamesh it. There you go. Just kind of want to start filling this stuff in and get some base shapes to start working with. I'm keeping a close eye on chat, so if you guys want to ask questions about game design specific or character art for games or ZBrush questions, you're more than welcome to. See if we can get those going. I'm not the best expert. I am no Paul or Joseph, um, but I got some knowledge for the game design side. So, okay. So one of the things that I try to do um, a lot uh, is make sure that I'm always spinning it around and looking at it from all angles. Making sure that from this side the sweep back feels okay. Shapes are kind of molding into each other. And and feeling good, right? You want them to got to get the feels. We're just gonna kind of start cleaning some of this stuff up. So, Gigi, any consideration you take on a game character versus a film character? Yeah, there's there's quite a bit actually. With film character, it's very. I mean, I've worked most of my professional career in games, so I can't speak to what a professional um, film modeler does or what's important, but what I'm assuming is that it's really shot specific modeling, right? So if you know that you get your shot list for film from the vendor or from your art director or whatever, and you say, okay, this has to do A, B, and C. Then you build to that with film. The difference between for game is that you know as a real time asset, you have to build for everything. You have to build for every angle. You have to build for movement and the life and use of your asset is much more diverse than when you're building for film. So with that in mind, you have to um, really look at a lot of different angles and a lot of different functionalities. You have to take into account, what your movement is going to be, what's your topology going to look like to support that movement. What does your shapes look like that are going to be baked versus modeled? Those types of things. So it's a bit different when it comes to the target platform that you're going to be that your asset's going to be living on. Another big one is as of right now is whether you're using UDIMs for your UV for your materials or if you're using just draw calls. So, and then we got to look at functionality too, right? Like if I'm looking at this piece right here that we see at the moment, obviously this functionality, like if she as soon as she lifted her arms, like she would just have a giant hole in her shoulder. So I want to make sure that you hear my daughter in the background. I don't want to go to bed. So I want to make sure that functionality works, and that it makes sense, right? But one of the biggest things is that you got to make sure that your asset looks good from all angles is one of the big things. Okay, so this. Let's Dynamesh again. Get some of these holes out of the way. Here we go. Is this more geared towards cinematic? What happens to the gameplay character if it's a different model? Typically for and that's a very good question. Is what is a cinematic game model versus a in-game game model look like, and what are those differences in functionality and how you're making things? Um, Typically, what realistic pipelines look like, or at least in my experience, is that you'll embrace LODs for your game mesh. So you build to cinematic quality, and you use that in your cinematics, and then of course, it's up to the creative directors too, right? They'll have an idea of okay, are we going to use IGCs, which are in-game cinematics? Are we going to do a like ILM style cutscenes? Are we going to do what are we going to do? But typically, in more realistic pipelines these days, we can get away with enough details in the actual game model to create a cinematic version of it. So typically, like you would model everything to your cinematic at like a LOD 0. Also, a LOD is a level of detail. So the further you get away from the camera, it'll switch to a model that is like lower res, basically. So if you don't know what a LOD is, so like if the game camera is this close, it'll probably be at LOD 0, which is your highest fidelity model. And then as the camera gets further away, it always is able to tell the distance to the model. So as it gets further away and reaches a certain threshold, then it will switch to a lower res model, and so on and so on. So like as you get back out here, you're probably at like LOD 4, right, which is super, super low res, which is fine because you don't need to have all that detail in there from that far. So we'll just build to a LOD 0. And I do have the reference off screen, so I'm kind of looking at that while I'm going. But you have it on the bottom left of your screen, so I gotta worry. Right now I'm just looking at the silhouette differences and see where our thick shapes are and where our thinner shapes are. So again, I'm looking at all the different angles, right? So we've got all of this kind of sweeping back, and we've got this sweeping this way, and this kind of sweeping this way. So maybe we'll have this guy sweep back just a touch. Sometimes, like, if you're trying to just grab the end of this, um, you could do a couple things. You could just mask it off real quick. And then just kind of rotate it back. Or sometimes what I like to do is just lock the camera real quick. So there's in draw, you have lock camera, which is nice. So you can go into draw and lock camera. I use that quite a bit. So if I'm just trying to grab like just the end of it, I'm not actually like grabbing it and rotating. So I'll just lock the camera real quick. Oops. And then I can just grab wherever I want to without it accidentally grabbing the camera and rotating. It's really helpful. And then what you could do is you can actually put that on a hotkey, which is really helpful. I don't have it on a hotkey at the moment, so like I'm trying to grab the end of this here. Sorry, I had to mute real quick. My daughter was upset in the background. So I'm just gonna start looking at this silhouette here and see if I can get something a little bit closer. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, redynamesh. Let's look at here. Okay, let's get my reference up here. So yeah, LOD 0 is your friend when it comes to that. Let me see if we can get this guy up here. This guy's going to come up a little bit more like that. She's definitely got the Batman cowl like on crack, you know. For her to swing her head around really quickly is probably fairly tough. That's okay. Okay, so I'm gonna see if we can block in a ridge here. So this may be a little bit too thick through here. Um, I also move pretty quickly through some of my brushes, so if you're ever wondering what brush that I'm using, you just look up right here real quick. So I'm just going to knock some of this back a little bit. I also use Trim Dynamic, works pretty good on there. But you got to be careful when you're switching brushes quite a bit, though, when you're working on something like this, because the backface mask is brush specific. So you can accidentally, tear up the back of this. Which at this point during blackout is not that big of a deal, but all right. So we just kind of give ourselves a good smooth palette to work from on this, and then we'll start blocking in some of the inner thickness shapes. So we've got this piece that kind of like gets a little bit thickness in depth here, and then it rises up through here, and then we have kind of like this secondary subtle thickness here, and then probably out to thinner in here. So I'm probably going to do something like this where it comes out and kind of runs up this edge, and then this one will probably come down and just die out in here. and then you'll get some really cool shapes happening as you kind of move around. So planning out like how you want some of those shapes to go, just looking at the concept really helps. Why? Turn my intensity up here. Okay, so we'll just knock this back. Maybe this comes out a little bit more. Can you say the brushes that you use most? Be super new to ZBrush learning. Yeah, I keep my brushes um, very simple. I basically use these, right? So I use standard. Actually, I don't use standard very often. I use standard really for alphas and painting. So my typical brush is my clay buildup, um, move topological, H polish I use, damn standard, and that's basically it. Those four, um, mostly the three, honestly. So clay buildup, move topological, and damn standard. Those are the biggest ones that I use. So I'm just gonna run. I'm gonna run this thickness up here like this. And again, I'm not worried about how pretty it looks yet because I'm just going to smooth it out later. Okay, and then we've got this kind of thickness that kind of runs through here like this. Yeah, no problem. Um, Picking up a Cintiq for ZBrush. Any suggestions? Looking at 22 or 24 Pro. Um, Cintiq. I've actually almost my entire art career have only used an Intuos. I've only recently got a like a 16-inch Cintiq for like living room sculpting. So I can't speak to um, lots of professional experience using one or not. But what I can say is I think it becomes more of a deal with the mechanical side of it, which is do you have enough space for a 22 or 24? Are you going to travel with it? Is it something that's forever going to be um, just in your office, or are you planning on taking it with you places? Those types of things. Um, as for like screen real estate, or does it help you be a give you better screen space or whatever? It's tomato really. So is the price difference between those two really worth it? Um, that's up to you. I can't really speak too much to Cintiqs, unfortunately. Other than uh, I don't really have a. I've never really used them. I've had chances at work to get them and use them. I'm much more comfortable on an Intuos actually. Yeah, they're big and heavy and cumbersome. So if it's something that you're looking to kind of travel around with, like Taka's saying, then it might be one thing. So I'm just trying to block in some of these. Okay, that guy goes there. This guy comes back up. Okay. It looks like these guys may actually come in a bit more. Give us some more room in here. So when you're this is another interesting take too, and it's more kind of within the wheelhouse of a game character artist and how you interpret concepts, right? So a major part of a character artist's job is to interpret a concept, right? How do I get this cool picture into reality? Is really what your job is, outside of creating your own from your own concepts. But one of the things that you have to do is you may not always get orthos from people or from your concept artist. So you have to if you're looking at like, oh, how does this, where does this say, how much distance between here and here, or how much distance between here and here, and like, but you have to compensate for some of the differences in the pose, right? That's in your concept. So if you're looking at like, oh, there's a distance from here to here, that may be true in the concept, but she also has like this shoulder is higher than this shoulder, and she's kind of got her head cocked to one side, so that would greatly affect how these differences are. So you're like, well, is this true or is this true? And you just kind of have to feel out what works in the actual model in the A pose. So what I'm thinking is that her neck feels a lot longer in this. Like her, if you took all of this off, it feels like she'd have kind of a, I don't say skinnier neck, but like a longer neck. So it looks like her lats are actually down here, which gives her a little bit more of like kind of this like a little more alien-y type of look. I may actually want to think of doing that. The question is, so let's turn this guy off real quick. Maybe what I'll do is actually move the head up a bit to give it a little bit more of that look. So anytime that I'm changing the base body, I usually, especially when it comes to joint positions or anything like this, and again, if you're in game design and you want to be very, very, very careful to ever move any kind of joints, because what happens is this will typically have an already set up skeleton from other characters. Um, and those skeletons have animations on them, and they have, weighting and all this things to consider that are post your work. So if, let's say, you have arm movements and they're all based on the joint being here, and then you move that joint, now all of those animations that stem from this joint now have to be redone. So you have to be very, 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 very careful. And that's the same. It's even more dangerous for the head because you have blend shapes to consider in head movement, neck movement, but like blend shapes are the big, big, huge, 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 huge thing. So in this particular case, this character is not animated, nor will she be animated. So I'm assuming that she doesn't have a rig yet, and that I am free to move her head around. So like those are the types of things that you really have to be super super careful in game design. Nope, not that one. We're going to do this one. So with all that in mind, let's actually go down to 1. With all that in mind, let's say I had it's very early on in the video game development of this particular project that this person is going in, and I confirmed with the rigging team that yes, she will have her own rig, and that we can move her joints because she hasn't been rigged up yet. Okay, cool, thanks, awesome. I'm going to elongate her neck then. I'm just going to move this out of the way so I can. So I'm going to turn off perspective, and we're just going to play with just a touch. Or you don't want to do it too much. Let's turn this guy back on. Okay, so let's say that for now. Let's turn off the mask. Let's grab this one. Let's move this up just a touch. And then move her eyeballs up just a touch. Okay, so we'll take this and we'll go back up a little bit just to see how we're looking. That actually feels a little better. Alright, we're going to make the decision. Rigging, are you cool with that? Yes, we're cool with that. Cool, we're going to do it. Awesome. Make the things. So the other thing is you can see that there's some asymmetry happening in the body. And we know that because we can just mirror and weld this thing and it stays the same, right? So we know for sure that it is the neck over here. So I'm just going to be really careful and move. Oh, right. I have a mask on. Just really slightly, I'm going to move the neck in. Super, super slight. Okay. So what I'm doing is I'm looking at the relationship of this negative space here. So if you look at in here, like we can, this lives a little bit further outside of her deltoid here. And it feels like it's a little more shallow, right? We can see this up here. So this is a little bit different from this side. So we'll figure out what works best. So we're going to take this. Let's make sure we have the right subtool selected. Hey, how about you select that guy? Thank you. We're just going to pull this up just a touch. So we can see a little bit more of it if it's influenced from the front. Okay. I'm going to grab a snake hook real quick. Pull this guy out. Okay. It's starting to look a little bit better. We got a little cooler shapes happening in there. Smooth all this guy out. The overall feels a little bit better. We had some kind of happy accidents happening here. This gets a little bit thinner up here, it feels like. It's a little too thick through here, so we'll just pull this down just a touch. Feels like it has a nice balance between thinness up here and it having a little bit more of a solid base down here. It actually feels like it may be flat in the front. So I'm going to use my H polish and maybe just flatten that out a touch. Right, and it's a little bit more of a delicate crown than it is a armor piece or something, or like a head protection piece, where it feels like it would need to take some impact. It feels a little more ornamental than it does functional. So we're just going to see what that looks like. Yeah, okay. And then we'll get some shapes that kind of like move in from this, kind of transition from this flat to kind of it growing out of here. Get some cool interactive connective shapes through here. Okay. It looks like we've got some things happening back here as well. You can see in this, right? So we got some things that suggest that more interesting things are happening behind the head. So this gives us some cool opportunities to take this shape language and kind of play with it in the back a little bit. So let's do that. So let's pull some of this mass down, right, and get right, and we can start playing with what some of these shapes back here are starting to do and feel. I like this part. This blocking in the beginning of the secondary shapes, I think, is one of the more fun parts. It's really an awesome chance to explore shapes and overall feel. Right, that's already feeling way cooler. I'm paying really close attention to like every single rotation of this, right? So this obviously is the most important one because that's the concept. But as we start pulling it this way, like are the shapes, they're not all of this is not on one singular level, right? When you do it this way, some are coming more, back further this way. Maybe some of these are kind of coming up this way, so that wherever you look, you get this really cool swooping and diving of shapes that are happening that give every single rotation just this really nice feel. Right? Like this, how it like kind of swoops backwards. Not only swoops this way, but also swoops backwards a little bit, and it gives a little bit more complexity to it. And then this piece of it kind of swoops forward a little bit. Right, so we kind of got this whole, it's coming this way, but this one's kind of coming back that way. And also thinking about how the light hits all of this as well is really important. If we want to decrease some of this thickness in here. All right. So then the big question is, how does it work back here? And this is I like this part of um, the character creation process because it gives you a chance to really take the design aspects that are already kind of established in the concept and start making them your own. So before I start getting into this this type of stuff, I think what I want to do is I want to establish what some of the repeating pattern secondary shapes are. So we've got like this kind of growth pattern happening, like this. So I want to establish that first, and then repeat some of those patterns as you get towards the back. I want to make sure that it's... So maybe we'll just use dam standard, and I'm going to go back and forth in between alt, so I'm pushing and pulling different... So another thing to think about is what is the lore, right? So Bjorn was saying that this was kind of a growth, like a unicorn's horn, right? That just keeps growing as this demon general becomes more and more badass, basically. So what I'm thinking is that it's more kind of like a ram's horn, where you start getting, or like a, what an actual horn looks like, where it's actually growing outwards, right? And you get these kind of striations of growth differences. And again, I'm not really committing to something yet. I can just smooth all this out and go from there and just redo it again. Really, I just want to get the idea in and see what that informs me of. You know, what is the growth pattern? So it comes out like this. Basically, you have something that's up and down that gets pushed in different vectors this way, right? And then maybe like on the edges you would have some weird thing happen, and that's in its outward growth it curls around. So that means, this would actually come in like this, which would make sense, right? From a physiological point of view. This might be kind of cool. So not only is it kind of having weird things happen as it's growing outwards this way, but it could also happen in layers this way. That might be kind of cool. Santana says, "Do 3D artists usually take permission from the concept artists, or do they just credit them after the fact?" It's a little bit of a mixed bag. You don't always have to ask for permission. It's always good form, if especially if you know the artist. Um, but regardless on if you get permission beforehand, um, or at all, is to always credit the concept artist. There's a lot of times where I'll just grab a concept and be like, oh yeah, this is cool. But whenever I'm working on it, and wherever I post that work, I always, always, always credit the concept artist. So I'd say you don't always have to, because it's hard to get a hold of people sometimes. And then, you know, as long as you're not uh, making money from it. It's typically, you know, oh cool, you're working on my thing, awesome, yeah, this concept is really dope, and whenever you post it, you can, like, oh, Bjorn does amazing work. Go check out his portfolio, right? It's just kind of a common courtesy kind of thing. But no, I don't say you always have to get permission. Um, I talked with Bjorn before this because he's got a book out, and he's a good buddy of mine. And he does amazing work. So anytime that I can help out, not like he needs the help, but anytime that I can give back, I guess you could say, uh, I do, especially to people who are, you know, amazing artists and good people, and um, do great things for the industry, and that kind of thing. So he's got a book that just came out, called Abominations, and that's what this concept is from the book Abominations. So he just did a Kickstarter not too long ago. Him and Spiridon actually put it together, and it's a great product. So if you get a chance to go check out the book or pick one up, it's even better. Abominations, awesome stuff in there. Okay, that's come a long way since where we started. So I look at balance quite a lot, and this is a really good example here, right? So not only am I looking at small, medium, and large shapes all over the place, but I'm also looking for them in silhouette. The silhouette tip gets missed quite a bit. So one of the things is, okay, this negative shape here is very similar to this negative shape here, right? So how do I make sure, or how do I make it better, and feel more natural from an organic point of view? Well, that's easy. Just take this, pull it over just a touch, and now you've got a larger shape with a smaller shape and a larger shape, right? So it's those things. So it's not just looking at um, the shapes on your model, but it's also about looking at um, your silhouette shapes as well. Then look at this shape here, from here to here, from here to here, and then maybe this whole shape, right? So I got a small shape, a medium shape, and a large shape, right? So I'm not only looking at the silhouette, but I'm looking at things from all points of view. Oh, look at that. Yeah, let's see. It's way too thick back here. Way too thick. And a lot of your quality will end up coming from this kind of the repetition of looking at things from all angles and making sure that um, positive shapes, negative shapes, all follow a nice um, artistic balance. So maybe this goes back, or it's aggressive and it goes forward. This goes back like that. Forward doesn't really make a lot of sense though, growth-wise, right? This will probably come back a little bit. Right, so we got like those growth patterns again, right? So kind of like so yeah, this is what we were working on earlier. I was like, let's get this whole growth pattern idea going first. So let's just start echoing that back here just to get some consistency. Yeah, no problem, Santana. And then these growth patterns could easily now interpret to why these little spikes are on here. You know. So the spikes happen because you've got this happening. Right? Those growth patterns are the reason why you've got those spikes. Then it starts making sense. Tudor says, do you work on the whole pipeline for character art in the games? Can you talk a bit about the flow of it, like after the sculpt and so on, still having gaps? Oh yeah, no problem. I'm actually, I've actually been strongly considering putting together like a um, not for dummies, but like a very high level intro to video game art. What's the pipeline and what the heck is a normal map and why do you use that? Why not use a bump map or you know do you use displacement maps? Those types of things. What are the maps? What are draw calls? What are all those things that like are super core to the job in general, but also helps out aspiring character artists. Um, so yeah, here's the basic overview. Is you know what? Hold on a second. Hold on. Hold on. Hold on. I think I have a flowchart that I used to have to show this. Hold on. Ha ha ha! I do. Bake to mesh method. So this is something I put together quite a long time ago, but it give you the basic idea. Right. So we start from a concept, and you do your high res mesh. Right. So that's what we're working on right now. Once all of your high res mesh details are made, then you take that and you build a new low poly model on top of that in 3D space. Um, so that's your retopo phase. Basically, that is going to be your in-game mesh, like your high-res in-game mesh. And then once you have that made, then you break out and make your UV sets for the character. Once you have the high-res and the retopoed with your UVs, those two things are living right on top of each other in 3D space. And that's when you bake, right? So then your baking is saying, okay, I'm going to take all of these high-res details and project them onto this low-res mesh, and that's when you get your maps, right? These are your baked out maps. So you can bake normal maps, which are the shape differences between your high res and your low res. You can bake vertex colors. And then there's all kinds of utility maps that you use to create your final materials. So there's like curvature map, there's a height map, there's vertex color map, there's material IDs, ambient occlusion, position, subsurface scattering, all kinds of other things, right? So during your baking process, you create all of these utility maps and you feed those into your material software. So whether you're using Substance or Mari or 3D Code or Quixel or wherever it may be, then you author all of your materials and then you bake out your final maps with your low-res asset and UVs, and then that becomes your final finished asset in game. That worked out pretty good. So that's the basics of it. Concept, create your high res, recreate your low res over it, create your UVs, and then once they're overlapping in 3D space, you bake them all down, you get all of your maps, you feed those utility maps into your material author software, and then in your final engine, you put your low res and your final maps, and boom, there you go. yeah, there's a lot happening. I actually look at it as like, okay, here's the thing that I'm making right now, but I have to think about all of these different little things that I'm like doing in order to get my thing working correctly, right? So there's tons and tons and tons of different things. So uh, yeah, hopefully that was helpful. That's a very 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 basics of it though. There's another version of it where instead of baking from one mesh to another mesh, there's actually this version. So this version is a little bit different, which is your bake. So there's two different baking methods. There's bake to mesh. So you're baking from hold on. Du- 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 du. Where did it go? Is this the same one? That's the same one. Let's see. I have to bake down. So there's bake 2, which is you have your high res model, and then you have your completely separate low res model, right? And then you're baking from one mesh to a completely separate mesh, right? So they're overlapping in 3D space, and then you say, I'm going to take so like if you have this plane right here, right? This is your high res, right? And you have all these details on it, right? And then you have your low res mesh that is like this. Well, what happens is in your low res mesh, you have this width of baking distance is what they call it. So it's basically your cage. So it says, okay, from this polygon right here, I'm going to go out a certain distance and I'm going to go in a certain distance. Right? So all of your details that are in your high res mesh right here are saying, okay, now I'm going to project all of those details on a map down to this polygon, right? So that's the distance, that's the cage that you use to bake to, right? So you're saying I have high res mesh, low res mesh. This is a completely different mesh, but it's in the same 3D space. That's bake to. There's another method that is bake down. So instead of a separate mesh, you have something like, where did my mouse go? Uh-oh. Oh, that's why. You have a bake down mesh. So if you have something like this, where you have multiple subdivisions on it, this is actually your low res mesh, right? So you can say, oh, I'm going to export that as an OBJ. This is my in-game mesh. But I subdivided the crap out of it, and now I have all these little details on it. Well, then, instead of it being completely two separate meshes, it's just one mesh with multiple subdivision levels. And then you can bake from your high res, like this. So this is your low res mesh down here. This is your subdivision 1. You subdivide, 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 and then you sculpt, 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 right? And then what it's doing is, because it's the same mesh, you can bake all of this down to your low res mesh. And that's just one mesh. So that's what ZBrush does, is saying I can take this particular one, and if I go down to subdiv 1 and go down to normal map, create normal map, that is your bake down method. So if it takes all of your details from your highest subdivision level and projects them down to your lowest subdivision level, the key is that you have to have UVs already on your low res mesh, right? So on this mesh you have to have UVs. But this high res mesh, you don't have to have UVs because I'm not baking down to anything, right? So here's your, so we clone that, go up to texture and take a look at that. Those are all the high res details from the sculpt that I can now bake down to the low res mesh. Cool. Does that help? Knowledge bombs, baby. All right. Where were we? Tangents. That's where we were. So the character deals. How many hours did it take you from start to finish? Many, many. Um, if you were working on a character 8 hours a day, let's say if you're working on them for, and I'm just going to turn perspective back on and lock my camera real quick. That way I can. Oh, locking the camera is so good because now I can just. I don't have to worry about. I love that. I need to decide what um, keyboard shortcut I want that assigned to. How much time? Yeah, so if you were working on a character from start to finish, 8 hours a day, like you would be in a studio, um, obviously depending on the model, I would say probably around 6 to 10 weeks maybe of work, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, that kind of thing. But it, everybody's everything's different. How many revs do you have on it? How many fixes do you need? Like, are you still learning? Because it may take a whole lot longer uh, to figure out. Oh crap! Okay, what kind of baking do I want to do? How many texture sets do I need? Okay, I need more UV sets. So it varies quite a bit, but it took me a good. I mean, I was still learning at that point. I actually did that model quite a long time ago now. Um, well, I think I spent probably 100 hours on that one. Characters are very lengthy projects from start to finish, especially for a final in-game mesh. That's why a lot you actually see a lot less finished models in people's portfolios than you do just sculpts. It'd be cool to like, have these like spiny things happening, right? So like we do have some of the spiny things happening from this side, but those in a growth pattern like those wouldn't just be in those areas. So how do we get that in more areas? Maybe it actually does this type of thing. Starting in the outer so far, I've done most of the basic forms on the face and torso, but not legs and arms. Split the head from the body, and I'm working with Dynamesh. When do you recommend I start with sub D layers? Um, I would say don't start your sub D layers until you're done making large silhouette differences. If you're done, with the major shapes, that's probably a good time. But you want to make sure that. So here's the other thing too, is that you don't have to start from a base mesh every single time, or you don't have to start from zero every single time. Just work on your anatomy, create your own base mesh with good UVs and good topology, and then just use that as your base mesh for your projects throughout the rest of until you're ready to make a new base mesh. I do that all the time. We do that consistently in Studio, which is like we don't just create the base mesh, especially for typical biped characters like this. We want to reuse the skeleton as much and animations that skeleton has as much as possible to create less rework for animators and for rigging for that matter, but it's really animators. So and that's what I did here. This body is just it's a 3D scan store, 3D scan store base mesh body, right? I've made a human character many, 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 many times, and I don't need to do it every single time. So if you're working on your own stuff, I would highly suggest, make your own base meshes. Make a female biped and a male biped, and then just use those again and again, right? No need to recreate the wheel every single time that you want to create something cool. Because more often than not, you'll get bogged down in the beginning of, the armature steps of, oh, okay, I gotta create the base body, okay, good. Gotta create all the fingers, and oh man, is the anatomy correct? Psh, just make a base body once, then use that. Because then what you can do is you can say, all right, well, my base mesh has good skin textures on it because I went through one time and I created all of my base skin textures for this particular female base body. Now I could just reuse that. Oh, well, okay, cool. Well, what if she's green? Or what if she's white, like pasty white, ghost white, like this? Fine. Let's start from your base textures that you already created, and then start from there. Easy peasy, man. Don't redo the wheel if you don't have to every single time. Concept art still mostly 2D, or is it more common to have 3D sculpts? Um, it really varies. There's more and more 3D happening, uh, but 2D is still right. You have to look at time versus cost, right? Say like, well, does it take less time to have ideation on paper, or on a 2D image, or does it take less time uh, on a sculpt? More often than not, it's still quicker and cheaper to do it by painting, right? Because all of your your different versions and stuff can be just painted over, you know. So as even though 3D is becoming more prevalent, you still have to take into account what is what makes the most sense from a production timeline and cost point of view. So a female character has armor and cloth on, and she has a bit of skin showing. So for the retopology part, should I cut the parts of the full body that aren't showing to get less polygons? Uh, Santanization. So that's a tricky question because it still depends on the functionality of what your model is going to be doing. Let's take this. Where'd she go? Let's take this one for example. Um, this is not really the best example because she's got a lot of skin showing. But the question is like, okay, let's say if this whole piece like wrapped around the whole torso, right? Do you need the skin underneath? So the big question is, would you ever see it? First off, that's the first big question. So, are you going to have physics on this, right? Is this something? Is it a jacket or something that may have physics that like would kind of open up and then you see a hole if there's nothing there? Then I would keep it, right? But then you have to think about the rig and your morphology basically, and say, okay, if I have skin like this and a jacket over the top, when that gets deformed, is it going to be consistent and make sure it doesn't clip through, right? So is it something that you know doesn't have a chance of clipping through, but you want to keep it just in case? You could. Um, but once you delete something, it goes away. So it's really tough. Um, I maybe just keep a couple versions of it, but typically, if you have something that you will never see underneath, um, then yeah, we delete stuff underneath all the time. Yeah, no problem, F. Fukenbron. Started. I started to learn how to sculpt faces and heads. Good luck, robot. It is a deep, dark hole, but it's fun. It is very fun. Actually, this is actually a good plug for the course that I just took. Is Marlon Nunez has a likeness sculpting course on art heroes, and I would highly, highly suggest taking that one. I got a ton out of that. Of course, I haven't finished the project yet, but I also work and have children. So, uh, but yeah, his likeness. Even if you may not be into likeness in general, you're like, oh, I don't want to know how to sculpt Michael Jordan face or Walter White face or something like that. The amount of knowledge it takes just to do that is immense. So even though you may not be into likeness sculpting, the amount of knowledge that you get out of those types of courses is invaluable. That's like me. I don't really get a lot out of sculpting likenesses for like actors and actresses. But if you think about it, um, we have to do that anyways in our normal job. We don't. A lot of times we don't have. I forgot what I was gonna say. Yeah, we'll have to sculpt a head to the likeness of a concept, right? I mean, and it may not be like a one to one, like, oh, I know exactly who that is. Whenever you look at it, you still have to match a particular look. You know what I mean? But just the amount of knowledge that you get out of it is pretty incredible. But that's a whole nother beast in and of itself because you start getting, especially in game design, you got to get into um, blend shapes and like the how does the mouth move and eyes and all that stuff. And yeah, it's the subtleties that go into a face is just so crazy, but it's a great challenge, and personally I love it. When the feeling that you get after nailing a great sculpt, like a head sculpt, is just, it's worth all the pain. You know what I mean? It is worth the pain. You sit back and you go like, oh, I did it. Damn it, that actually looks pretty good. Or you can be like me and go like, yeah, that still sucks. I'm just never happy with my art. It's our curse. Um, are you working on Dynamesh for the horns right now, or is that subject? It's Dynamesh. It's all Dynamesh right now. The horns. Mostly because I'm working with silhouette, and changing the morphology of things, and I really want to be able to not be hindered by trying to figure out what the right topology is. You know what I mean? So this is a really good time to be working in Dynamesh. You are just a little too much there, buddy. It looks uncomfortable to wear. It does. It very much does. Okay. But actually, it's not. When Bjorn was on and talking about the inspiration of the character and what is this kind of conversation, it's actually not. This is actually a growth, basically. It's she apparently it's the longer this demon general exists and the more she defeats enemies, the more her headdress grows, I guess, something like that. So it's kind of a little bit like like a stag, you know. He was saying like a unicorn, you know, like the longer it is alive, the more crazy the horn gets. So you can tell the prowess of this particular general just by how large the head bone dress is. That's starting to look pretty cool. Again, I'm looking at it from kind of all angles, right? It kind of swoops back and has like this swoop forward thing. Secondary shapes are starting to look um, feasible. Yes, Dynamesh is. Actually, it was Dynamesh that changed a lot of the industry in terms of how we create things for 3D characters. Before we did, it was mostly baked down, like I was saying earlier. But it was really Dynamesh uh, that really pushed us into like how do we make this awesome but still reserve our UVs, right? So like, well, you could, you know, make your base mesh something like this and then subdivide the crap out of it and sculpt it and do that, but you're like, then you're still kind of locked into this uh, the shape, right? So like, how do you embrace the freeness of an unlocked shape? You know what I mean? While still maintaining functionality of what your model has to do in the game. So Dynamesh came along, and we're like, oh crap, how do we do this? And then, you know, somebody was like, well, we'll just make a new low res mesh. Why don't we just do that? And then once it was like, oh yeah, I don't really, we have to remake it, right? You made it once, then you have to remake it. But the payoff is completely worth it because the freedom that you have, not working with UVs at the blockout stage, you can do all kinds of crazy stuff. And it's a small price to pay to have to go in and do um, a remesh or retopo to benefit from what you get out of freeform modeling. So honestly, it was Dynamesh that really changed the whole industry in terms of that. I thought it was fascinating. Everybody was like, "Oh, how do we do this? Oh my God, how do we do this?" So now I'm just kind of looking at different secondary shapes here. Now that we got the mass right, we got like the thickness established. We've got some secondary thickness in here. We've got some growth pattern starting to get defined. Our major. Sorry, let me drink a water real quick. Our major forms and silhouette pieces are in, and now we can start really, how do you say, reinforcing some of those shapes with secondary shapes. And probably what I want to do is I want to wait on those actually, because I need to redynamesh one more time, and it'll probably destroy most of this. So I just want to get the idea of some of this stuff coming in. So I don't want to do anything permanent or just want to get some ideas of how this is going to look. The other things that you have to consider for game mesh is silhouette is costly. So, for every niche in a silhouette, costs you geometry. It makes things much more expensive because you can't fake it with maps, right? You can't fake this with maps. You have to actually build that into your low res. So you have to be really careful with um, having an absolutely crazy silhouette. So the challenge becomes, how do I get the most bang for my buck without having it cost an absolute fortune in geometry? Maybe it's at certain angles you have specific pieces that are modeled in, right? So you can get the most out of your hero angles. You know, your hero angles usually consist of front on, 3/4 profile, uh, back 3/4, back. Right. So it's those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 angles that are super important, right? Down here you don't really see your model like this too often. You don't really see your model like this too often. So you can kind of get away with not doing all the good stuff there. But frontal and front 3/4 are probably the most important. So if you can create your silhouettes to take advantage of your front and 3/4 to be able to build in whatever that geo is to look the best there, then so like the front ones here or like the front ones in here, I could probably bake those. Maybe we'll just have like one or two little ones that are actually modeled in here, right? And then I can actually just sculpt and bake these ones in here, because once you see it this way, maybe one or two or something like that, but like you don't really have to model all of them in, right? You can have a nice balance between what's modeled and what's baked. Yeah, hero angles are super super important, right? I mean, you're basically creating uh, a fabrication, right? With game art, is you're saying, how does this model represent something that it isn't? you know, and if you can do it in a smart way and say, okay, well, what are the most important angles? Then build to those. Okay, so I'm okay with this. I just want to get some hints at what this is going to do, so I can get the overall feel, and I think this is enough for right now, just to get that feel. Now I want to start working on the jaw piece here. All right, what does this jaw piece look like? Let's take a look. So it looks like it's probably going to be pretty thick out here, because it looks like it's got this outer piece, which has a set of teeth spikes. It has an inner piece just outside of her lower lip that has these, and then her lip. So it'll probably be fairly thick in terms of from her lip to the chin. But then we can offset that thickness in here. Right, so it doesn't look like it's something super super crazy. And then we can offset the overall sense of thickness, in here, in here, in here, and then maybe in here as well too. Right, so I want to make sure that I get a good balance of, so it doesn't look so clunky, right? It doesn't look clunky on her, and it's because we have some of these really thin pieces, these thinner areas mixed with more thicker areas, that it makes it look um, not complicated, but say intricate. So maybe we'll pull this up, right? We'll work on the thickness first. So we want this to be thin, This will be thicker. It'll probably come out like this. This will be thin in here. Thin, thin, thin. We'll just use our H polish and just flatten this down a little bit. You get a little ridge here, and then we'll just pull that down to kind of create that thickness. It's penetrating into her head mesh, which is totally fine at this point. Right, so we do a nice balance between thick areas and thin areas. How much of the silhouette can be baked into the height maps? We don't really use height maps um, in game. So are you thinking more displacement maps? So there's a couple of different ways you can affect the height of a model. One is a displacement mesh or displacement map, which is a grayscale map. That's typically not used in game res. That's where the normal map comes in. So the problem with displacement map is that it's actually more expensive because it's creating a tessellation of the geometry and then displacing it based on your map, right? So that obviously is way, way, way more costly because your engine is calculating every single polygon that's in there. So if you're using a displacement map and it tessellates, it basically subdivides all the way down till you can create that look of the displacement. So we don't really use displacement maps in game res or in game models. That's where normal maps come in. So there's displacement maps. So that's normal maps. We use normal maps in game. There's height maps. Um, Height maps are typically not used in the engine. They're more used um, as a utility map when you're crafting your materials. So you can inform different material applications based on a height map. So you would use that at that time and not necessarily at runtime. And then there's old school bump maps. So bump map is a grayscale map. It's a lot like a displacement map, but it was used before normal maps came out in um, in video game usage. So bump maps are pretty much dead at this point. So you have three. You have displacement map, which isn't used really in game. Normal map, which is how we project the details, that doesn't affect silhouette. And then your height map, which is not used in the actual engine. So, long story short, in video game res models, you have to build your silhouette breaks in Geo. Ah, too many maps! I'm so confused! Ah! All right, so here's the next big question is, what does this shape, right? So we're going to have, our other hero angle is 3/4, right? So at this, right, you're going to be looking here most of the time. So this shape right here is super, super important. How does that look? What does it feel like? Right now, she looks like she's got a heart head face person. I don't really like that. It doesn't really scream cool to me. So I'm going to make sure that whatever the shape is, I'm going to call it the negative face shape. It has to be interesting, right? And it also has to echo um, the rest of your design elements throughout the. Yeah, this is a tough part. Okay, here's something that. So I'm looking at where this ends. And right now it looks like she's got just forehead for days. Looks like she's got like an 8 head, right? Which is not really the sense of what we're getting here, right? I'm looking at what does this shape look like, right, on the inside. What does her face shape look like? And this doesn't look anywhere near that. So I'm looking at, okay, well, how far is this piece from her brow? And it actually comes way further down, right? Which will cut down on some of this. And then from there, what does this shape look like coming over? So I'm going to do some exploratory um, movements here to see if we can get the presentation of her negative face shape to be more in line with what we want. Yeah, she does look like a shark right now. I think all of this has to just come way far up. So let's let's go crazy and then just pull it back a little bit. It's if something feels really off to me, like this whole thing's got to come down just a touch. Okay, getting there. We also have to think about the shape of her skull. Um, the actual head shapes and what this. So like if we took the crown off and said, does this person look like the same person as this? No, not really. So maybe what I should do is take a little bit of time. Oh, she got a little lopsided head. Take a little bit of time and redo some of the shapes of the head and face to fit a little bit more of the style of what her facial shapes look like here. And I think that's what we need to do. So I'm gonna work on that first, and then we'll fit the outer piece to the new head. So let's do that. Let's go crazy. Let's take us down to maybe a 1 here, or 2. Yeah, let's do 2. All right, and I'm going to work out of symmetry because this base mesh is not symmetrical anyways. So I will have to do a little extra work on both sides. But I look at the work that you have to do out of symmetry as practice. It's really good practice. Oof. Because then you get to work on 2 things. Oh, she's a little. Her head's a little weird. Look at this. Look at this. Look at it. I just noticed this. Look at the bridge of her nose. That's crazy. And like her actual nose is pretty small in comparison. And she's got much bigger eyes. Interesting. That will be interesting. The bridge of her nose is really wide. It does it, and I think it's those little subtle things that push it so interestingly is because it's not just a general head with general proportions, right? You have just this slight elongating of the neck, right? And the the eyes are just a touch small for her face, and just pushed out just a little bit wider. It also makes me feel that she actually feels a little bit. So I'm looking at the depth of the eyes from the brow, and typically in Asians, you have a flattening of this area here, right? Like the eyes don't sit as far back as you would see in Caucasian. And that's what I'm feeling here is that the distance from the front of the brow to, um, the front of the brow here to the eyes and the cheeks aren't crazy. It feels a little bit more of Asian descent. But the eyes are much more rounder and almond that we see. Right? We don't have the top eyelid coming in typically that you would see. That interesting. Okay, we're gonna play. Devil is in the details, and it's really paying attention to those little things that can make or break you. Right? You can say, oh well, why does it look dumb? Like why does it not look like her? And it's paying attention to those super super small details that gets you a lot of bang for the buck and pushes you to that next level. Did I? I did not. Shoot fire. All right. Before I do this, I want to duplicate the body mesh. Typically, when I do massive changes to something like a base body or something like that, I'll dupe it off, put a version of it down at the bottom, just so I can go back if I really really need to. Okay, so let's work on that for now. So we're going to push the nose back a little bit. All right, and we're going to bring the eyes forward. All right, so the depth between the front of the nasal bone and the corner of the eye is much more shallow in the concept. And that may be a mixture of pulling things back this way and pulling things forward. And when I'm doing kind of big shifts like this, I've always found that the more kind of micro movements that you do, see, I'm not like going, oh, I'm going to pull this out here and pull this out here. Like, oh, God, no. I found that the more kind of little micro movements that you do like this lead to much better results. Consistency of keeping your topology in a sane spot. Make sure that the opening of the eyes are staying relatively. So the general shape of the eye is that the inside of your eye, the crunkle area, is just a touch lower than the outside. And then the highest point of the upper eyelid is just on the inside of the lowest point on your lower eyelid. So if you were to take the highest point here and the highest point here, it would be almost a little diagonal like this. And the outermost point here and the outermost point here would be just a touch downslope this way towards your nose. And I'm not looking to define the overall characteristic of the shape of the eye at this point. I just want to make sure that it stays within those bounds so it still maintains its overall. And the lower eyelid usually doesn't pull out as far in front of the upper eyelid. Just use my damn standard. We'll just push this in just a touch in here. Maybe easier to use. Okay. And of course it's asymmetrical. And I forgot that. Shoot. So I'm going to go back, do it again. We'll do more practice. Okay, I'm going to turn off symmetry for now. Then we'll work on correcting this eye. We'll do it to this eye, and then we'll do it to the other eye. So this can be a bit of a timely process. So maybe we'll just get the overall shapes, and I may go back later and just do some correcting so we don't take so much stream time on it. But I at least just want to kind of show you some of the more annoying sides of things that you have to do to make sure that it looks right, you know? It's not all glory. Okay, let's push this back in a bit. Okay, so then what I want to do is I need to push the zygoma shape forward a bit more here to compensate. All right, so basically what we're doing is we're kind of squeezing it together, right? So the eyes and zygoma come forward a little bit, and the nose and the bridge of the nose comes back a touch. And what happens, we'll get this kind of shortening of the thickness of the face that will make the presentation of the face much, much different. And then we'll work on the shape of the nose real quick because her nose actually comes back quite a bit. Doing a little was it rhinoplasty? You can do the nose. So many little details. All right, we'll pull the zygoma closer to the front here. Touch. We'll go up one step here. See if we can get these just a little bit more symmetrical, and then we'll see how that's looking. It's really amazing when you look at scans of heads, of real people's heads, just how asymmetrical people's faces are. It's crazy. One of the things that that I've been suggesting to people who are learning heads and faces and stuff is get your hands on some actual scans, and then so like a 3D Scan Store has sales on their scans quite a bit, like multiple times a year. Um, so one of the really great things that you can do is just go pick up a couple of head scans and study them. Right, that's real world data, you know, and it's super duper valuable. I'm just gonna reduce her skull just a touch. Maybe her chin is just a touch too long too. Okay. In this one, show her some interesting shapes happening here. Like it looks like her brow kind of comes here, and this comes back just a touch. Um, Also, you have to take into account how difficult it is to nail painting a head. It is by far one of the most difficult things to do. So a lot of times you don't, as a character artist, to say like, okay, you may have to deviate a touch from like the exact things that you see, right? Like, so this shape here is just a touch different from this shape here. Like it has like this like downward slope almost here, which is not indicative of what the shape is that's happening here. So you have to say, okay, well, what's the overall feeling of the head that's here, and nail the overall feeling. But that might mean a departure in some areas from how it's rendered. So that's part of the job, I guess you could say, is interpreting, how do I get this feel, right? How do I nail this feel, but doing in a way that's feasible in 3D space? The other thing you have to keep in account too is, if you're working from a posed concept, is her face like this? Is it like down a little bit? Is it up a little bit? Like have to take into account the angle of the head on that neck as well. So if I did her nose like this, that looked like this from the front, it probably won't look right because it feels like her head's kind of up just a touch, like her back just a touch. So you have to take those things into account too that get quite a bit of kind of miss that sometimes. So we're gonna pull in the nostrils a touch. Whew, these nostrils need some work. So we'll build up the nostril, kind of flatten this area in here. All right, so here's the nostril. I'm just gonna build up the forms a little bit to make sure that they're there, and then I'll get back to shaping them. So nostril. Okay. So then let's take a look at the nostril openings and just kind of clean this up just a touch. Yeah. Devil is in the details, and if you forget the details, you'll see the devil. Oh, I kind of like that. Kind of like that. Okay, just reinforce the lines of filtrum. I think that's what it's called. Okay, so now we have this little bit flattening of the face now, right? Which is, she's looking a little bit more Asian, which is fine. I love looking at different the different ethnicities and how the face structures work. Oh, it's so cool. Love it. I was actually thinking about teaching a course on that too at some point, or at least I don't know, maybe doing something. All right, let's turn on symmetry again. It's gonna bring in the skull just a touch. I think the jaw is just a little too droopy, so we're gonna pull that up a little bit. Okay. Okay. So now what I'm gonna do is I want to express some of the important shapes in this one. So here's what I'm looking at. So I'm looking at the light, right? So the light is coming from, obviously about where this one is, maybe here. Maybe we'll just do a quick render. Yeah, it's gonna be even higher. Maybe it's like way up here. Something like this. Okay, so if you mimic the light a little bit, then you can start seeing the shapes and how they're playing. So it feels like her brow is a little bit more forward, right? You got this little dark shade in there. So it looks like, she's got some shape here, but it goes back quite a bit, right? And then the most prominent part is the brow here, and we're not really getting that here, right? We don't see like this dip in here. So let's do that real quick. And then I'm just going to do some big shape changes. So I'm just going to pull that back, and then let me smooth that out a touch. Okay. And then typically you'll see the front of the forehead first, like this. And again, I'll pull all this back soon. So you got the tip of the forehead. Right, then you got the temple that comes. Right, so the brow. Whoa, easy there, buddy. Okay, we'll get a quick. All right, so now we see a little bit more of the brow, which is good. I think the eyes still need to come out a little bit more. They feel a little too wide. All right, okay, so we got this shape of the forehead that comes up a little bit. We've got this shape of the brow that comes out a touch, right? It goes in here, and then kind of get the temple bone that comes in here like this. Just smooth that out a little bit. Temple bone that kind of comes in here like this. Smooth that out. So now we get the light is playing a little bit different. Now The nose feels a little too long. So I'm going to pull eyes down just a touch. The other thing about feminine face too is you typically have like this nice full zygoma area here, like this, and then you have kind of this line that comes down like that, and you have really full zygoma area here. So I'm going to push towards more kind of like stylized, not stylized, but feminine specific shapes for this one. All right, let's see how that's looking. Oof. All right, so now let's work on the shape of the eyes just a touch here. Just clean some of that up. Nose shapes still feel quite a bit off. It was not my intention to get into head sculpting in this round. I think I'll save most of the head tuning for next round. And I think we'll take a much deeper dive into to the head shapes. I think on the next round. Because right now this is a very, very slippery slope in how much time you spend. Again, you gotta look at all the sides. I think the other important thing that I like doing as well too is when you're thinking about wrapping up the project that you're working on for that particular session. Right? You're like, okay, where do I step away for today? I think one of the most important things to do is to leave something fun to get back to. Right? You're like, I'm in the middle of something that is kind of fun. You're like, oh, I can't wait to get back to that. It actually will bring you back to the project more successfully than if you leave that particular project at a point that's really, really annoying. So if you leave yourself something fun to come back to, a lot of the times you'll actually come back. So I highly encourage when you're thinking about starting to wrap things up, uh, that you do it at a point where you're like, yeah, I want to come back and do more of that. I've always found that really helpful. Yeah, the eyes, the face needs a lot of help now. It's okay. Live in the valley of the suck for quite a while. going to try to do is so we're just a touch. I'm going to work on some of the symmetry while I'm doing this. I want it to be a little bit more symmetrical, so I don't have to when I'm sculpting the headpiece. It doesn't have to be so symmetrical. Aha! Look at that. The front eye is actually more forward than the left eye. Maybe that's why things are weird. Well, that explains some things. Not to say that that doesn't happen in real life or in realistic life. But when something looks really off, there's usually a good reason for it. Okay. Yeah. The head is a very, very slippery slope. Yeah, the bridge of the nose looks a little like the nose feels a little long, yeah. I want to be careful not to show too much of the underside, though. I know you can see it in the concept, but you don't want to show too much of the inner nostrils because it starts to look a little like pig-like, I guess you could say. So I'm going to be careful not to do that, but also take into account, though, that the lighting is not correct. We don't have shadows in there, so you could just do a quick render, see what that looks like. Actually, it looks like her head actually comes like her cheek shapes are like a lot wider. Like it actually comes out like that. Yeah, we'll do. I think we'll work on the head sculpt next time. I'm not I'm not too worried about. I hate leaving it when it doesn't look good though. I think the eyeballs got to come forward a little bit. Yeah, this is way too thick in here. We'll get it. We'll get it. Maybe these guys gotta come. You know what? Maybe we can just do this. Let's mirror and weld so that we know for sure that they're symmetrical. And then we can build the face around that. Okay, a couple more minutes and then I'm gonna call it for today. I tend to get carried away when I'm doing this type of stuff. Maybe the eyeballs are a little too big. I think the eyeballs are too big. So let's do this. Let's let's scale them down just a touch. Like maybe just like 5%. See if that does. That feels a little bit better. I think the eyeballs were too big. Let's see. Okay, we're gonna go just a little bit crazy and make the openings just a touch bigger, like we see in the concept. We can we can get lost in her eyes as much as we want, but we want to make sure that we're still living in our means with what the concept is doing. So just yeah, look at that. Her brow is so far forward. Let's actually maybe we can just bring the brow back a touch in general. Wait, we completely changed the look of her face, huh? Okay, last couple minutes. We gotta call it for today. Let's at least just get the thickness looking better. Just flatten this out in here. Yeah, we got all kinds of funky topology movements in there. But we'll get it right. Maybe what we can do, the other thing that may help too, is a lot of times when you have like a big graphic design in the middle of something, it's really tough to nail the thing that you're doing. So maybe we could just get that graphic design in real quick. Ooh, yeah, she's okay. So let's go to standard real quick. We'll do RGB. We'll just do this quick. So let's do fill object, and then we'll go to like a red, something like that. This comes down to about here. Let's go up in subdiv so we can get some more topology in there, because the topology is what makes your vertex colors mo better. Because really we're just assigning a color value to the vertex. So if you're low res, you don't have that many vertexes in there. But if you're high res, you have more. Hence, you will be able to okay. Maybe what we'll do too is we'll just do like a quick block out to see what it looks like here. And I'll typically do this type of thing often if part of the graphic design is kind of a big part of the overall model. Just go in and block it in real quick, just get an idea. See if you're, because sometimes this will inform a lot of different things. Yeah. Oops. We'll just color pick that guy. Maybe what we'll do is we'll just do like a quick bone color. Maybe it's a little bit more yellow. Something like that. And then we'll do fill object. Do this. Then we'll just do, maybe we'll just do a quick. Anywho, I think that's probably a good place to call it for this round. Let's get into doing more of the head sculpt on the next round and see if we can nail that. Or at least get it to a spot where we're happy with it. See that? Already that feels a little bit better. Let's do this. Let's just color grab that guy. Fill object there. Yeah. Yeah, we can already see like some major differences in this area specifically. But yeah, I'm feeling good where the head piece is going. Looks a lot better than it did. And then we'll probably do some head sculpting next round and focus on the neck and the front piece. And then we'll get into maybe doing some more block out for the armor for starting points and stuff, and just start filling in the rest of the pieces here, so we can get them in and look at look at the whole character in a more holistic way. We start blocking everything else in. Cool. Well, that was fun. So thanks everybody for coming by, and I'll just take that out real quick. Yep. Yeah. So I hope you guys had fun. I hope you guys learned a couple things, but most of all, I hope you were inspired to go make your own cool stuff. So get out there, do it. Go make some cool stuff, and then post it, and then come back next time. Definitely make sure to follow the Pixologic Twitch channel here. There's a lot of other amazing artists that stream on here. Anything from stylized to creatures to all kinds of the jewelry, printing for 3D, all kinds of stuff like that. So make sure to follow it here and have fun. Go do some sculpting. Don't forget to go outside as well. I heard that's really important. So, all right, thanks for the good convos today, and we'll see you. Bye.